It's still winter here in western Colorado, but that's not going to stop me from planting some summer crops today. Of course, I'm not going to put them into the garden. I'm going to do something called winter sowing. Now, winter sowing should have been done a long time ago, and I have a bunch of them that I started a few months ago, but I ran across some new milk jugs. I have a few extra bags of potting mix and a little extra time on my hands, so I thought, why not just throw some seeds into the soil? I have a bunch of different types of seeds that I'm going to try, and I have 14 different milk jugs, so 14 different varieties. Now, right off the bat, there are a few things that I'm doing wrong. Typically, you would winter sow a few months prior to now. Right now, it's March 16th, 2024, and it's just a little bit late to be winter sowing, but I'm still going to do it. They'll be fine. Another thing that I'm doing that I normally wouldn't do is I'm using potting mix here. Typically, when I'm winter sowing and I need to depend on the seeds germinating and everything like that, I like to use a soil starting mix that's more sterile. However, you can have just as much success with the potting mix. You just run a little bit of a higher risk of your plants being susceptible to things like mold. When you're winter sowing, the first thing you want to do is cut a milk jug just below the handle. You want to cut most of the way around the milk jug, but not all the way around. You want to leave the top and the bottom still somewhat attached. Then you want to poke some holes into the bottom of the milk jug. You can get yourself a utility knife or a screwdriver or something like that to drill some holes. And then you want to add anywhere from 3 to 5 inches of soil or so to these milk jugs. The plants are going to be in these milk jugs for a long time, and their root systems are going to grow deeper than perhaps under a grow light. So you just want to give them a lot of soil to grow into. And another reason for this is they're going to consume a lot of the nutrients that are in the soil. So if you give them a tiny little bit of soil, there's not a lot of nutrients in them, and they might not do very well. Finally, you want to water the soil. Typically, I would do this in a big bin before even putting them in the milk jugs, but I got a little ahead of myself today, so I'm just going to water them in the jugs and let them sit for a while. It takes them a little bit to dry off, but it's not the end of the world. So here are a bunch of the seeds that I'm going to be planting, and then here are my milk jugs set up so that I can go ahead and get started with the planting of seeds. I'm going to start with the Connecticut field pumpkins. There's no reason for me to start them right now. I'm still quite a bit away from my last frost date, but I figured there's a bunch of people asking, will this, that, or the other thing grow in winter sowing? So I thought I would start a bunch of different types of seeds to be able to tell you if yes or no, if they grew or not in the winter sowing method and how well they grew. You probably saw the milkweed. I have a couple of these growing in my other winter sow bins, but I'm going to try one in a milk jug by itself. I typically put anywhere from 4 to 6 seeds into the containers. I have quite a few varieties of cucumbers as well. That one, the Puna cucumber from India, that's one of my favorite. They don't send a lot of seeds when you order them, but we're going to see how these seeds germinate winter sowing. I've always had success winter sowing cucumbers pretty early on, but I haven't tried it this late into the season before. I have a feeling it's going to be fine. Cucumbers typically grow very well no matter where you plant them. They're pretty resilient. This year I'm going to be putting a trellis system into my garden to maximize the vertical space in the garden, especially for the cucumbers, because if you let them grow on the ground, they can really vine out on you and take up a lot of space in your garden, and that's just not always what you want to have. There's quite a few different varieties of squash in there. I had planted some summer squash, some Lakota squash, and a few different types of gourds. There's the cornucopia gourd mix, which is just a bunch of different types of gourds. Here's some milkweed seeds up close, and you can see that before I started filming, I poked some holes into the soil. Now, with these seeds, a lot of these are bigger seeds, so you can plant them a little bit deeper if you want to, but you really don't have to. The important thing is if you have really, really small seeds like basil or something like that, you'd want to just put it right on the top, maybe put a little impression down with your finger, but most of the seeds I'm working with today are pretty big, and they can go down pretty far into the soil. As you can probably tell, I've confused myself a few times with where I wrote which label I wrote where. That's kind of what I'm doing. I'm trying to figure out where each different type of seed goes. But writing the labels down on the milk cartons beforehand definitely saved a lot of time. And here's some Connecticut field pumpkin seeds, nothing too fancy. I just put about 4 of these into the jug, and we will see what happens in a few months. Now here's a rundown of the seeds I'm starting today. Some milkweed, the Connecticut field pumpkins, straight 8 cucumbers, the gold summer squash, Georgia rattlesnake, watermelon. So these are some really weird varieties I wouldn't normally start this early. Punakira cucumbers from India, cornucopia gourd mix, all the year-round lettuce, moon and stars, yellow flesh, watermelon, and some Boston pickling cucumbers. So I have a bunch of different seed companies here. Some black seeded Simpson lettuce, which usually grows really well like this. Some cantaloupe. So a few big vining varieties of the vegetables that I'm starting here today. The whole point of winter sowing seeds is so seeds can come up when they are ready to on their own terms. So as soon as the soil temperature gets warm enough for a certain variety of seed, then they will rise up and they will grow. Now, one of the benefits of winter sowing is you can get a couple weeks head start because the milk jugs act as a greenhouse, trapping all that heat in, increasing the humidity a lot, so you can really get started with your vegetable garden. Another benefit is it is a lot easier to do this method of winter sowing than it is to start seeds indoors under a grow light. And I say this because these seeds are going to be out in the sun in these jugs, and they are already essentially hardened off. There's a few more details about getting them used to wind, but overall they will be perfectly hardened off from the sun. Watering isn't usually too big of a deal unless you live out west where I do, where it's a little bit drier. I'll probably have to supplement the water a little bit, but really the evaporation isn't too bad. And if it rains where you are, well, the rain can get into the jugs to give the soil all the water that it needs. When crops are growing in your jugs, you just want to make sure that there's still condensation on the inside. If there's not too much condensation on the inside, you probably need to add a little bit of water just to make sure that nothing dries out. Since Colorado has pretty extreme weather, meaning that it gets really warm during the days and pretty cold at night, I'm not exactly sure what's going to happen to all of these seeds. I've grown many seeds that people said that they could never get to winter sow, and I've also lost some seeds where some people have said that they're really easy to winter sow. However, in my opinion, I have so many seeds that it's really not an issue to lose a few. I'll still be able to reuse the plastic jugs. I'll still be able to reuse this soil. All I'll lose out on are some seeds if it doesn't work out. So if you have some some seeds at your disposal and you're not too worried about losing some, just give it a try. One year it might work out, one year it might not. It just depends on weather patterns, really. And there's really not much lost in trying. I personally have a lot of different types of seeds. So for example, for cucumbers, I have several different varieties. Tomatoes, I think I have 34 varieties. Peppers, I have around 40 different varieties. And for each variety, I have quite a large amount of each individual seed. So again, I'm not really out too much if a couple of these jugs are to fail. When you're looking for a location to place your milk jugs, you want to make sure that you're really familiar with the amount of sunlight that each part of your yard gets per day. For example, if you put them in a south-facing window, they're going to get direct sun just about all day long, which isn't a huge deal. You just might have to water them a little bit more than if you were going to put them in a west or east-facing area of the yard. Since it can still get kind of cold at night here in Colorado, I tend to like to put my jugs onto a cement surface because the cement will retain a lot of the heat from the daytime and it will emit it at night. So the fluctuations inside of the milk jugs are not quite as extreme than if I were to put these right onto the grass. But I always encourage people to do what works for them because that's what I do for me. I do what works best for me. The final step is to tape these milk jugs shut, and if I had put a little bit more attention to detail, I would have cut these jugs a little bit differently. I would have made the incision a little bit further down from the handle, because the handle makes it hard to get a tight seal with this tape, but it's not the end of the world. It's going to work out just fine, so I'm not too worried about it. All this tape is doing is securing the top of the milk jug to the bottom of the milk jug, and it's going to kind of block out. It's gonna make it a little bit more airtight than if I were to leave it separated, which is pretty good for growing these seeds, just to give them that nice greenhouse-like environment. In a few weeks, when I go to harden these off, what I'm gonna do is start by taking some of taking the tape off, and then eventually removing the lid. Although I'm not too worried about the sun. I've tried this method in the past, and I just like to harden them off by taking the tape off, because it gives them more used to the wind. So they're already hardened off from the sun by just being in these milk jugs, but you do have to remember they need to be hardened off from the wind, especially out here in western Colorado. It's very, very windy almost every single day, so they need a lot of exposure to the wind. And here's the final result. They'll stay here for the next couple months. If you found this video useful or entertaining, please like and subscribe for more.